I'm your host, Rhonda Hammond, AIA, and this is the Voice of Florida Architecture, the podcast of AIA Florida. Welcome. Today, we're continuing our lecture series, but with a little twist. I have a very special host here with us today, Miss Lourdes Solera, FAIA. Lourdes?
Thank you, Rhonda. I'm honored to be today's host of the Voice of Florida Architecture, the podcast of AIA Florida. AIA Florida has a long and distinguished history, one defined by leadership, service, and commitment to excellence that has set the bar for professional associations nationwide. From sound financial stewardship and strong collaboration with local components to conventions and programs admired across the country. The strength of AIA Florida today is a direct result of the leaders who came before us, which is why this series is so important, because this podcast series celebrates legacy. And Rhonda is one of our legacy leaders. These collection of conversations, we're honoring past presidents and leaders of AIA Florida whose vision, dedication, and service have helped both the association and the profession at both state and national levels. These individuals represent an extraordinary depth of experience and institutional knowledge as an invaluable resource that continues to inform and inspire our work today. So today we are reconnecting with Rhonda, and we're doing it a little bit different. This is really a space for us to share and to have a conversation and to really preserve the wisdom of those who came before us and what their stories are. So we're turning the tables. Rather than Rhonda interviewing a former Florida president or leader, we're interviewing Rhonda Hammond, AIA, as we celebrate her accomplishments. I was honored to be this podcast series' first guest. Therefore, it seemed appropriate that I interview her. So it's the interviewee interviewing the interviewer. It's a tongue twister, right? So as such, I will pose to her the same questions, some of the same questions that she has posed all of us who have been her guests. So first, welcome, Rhonda, and thank you for being here to share your story. Please share what's your journey to architecture.
My journey to architecture. I have the convenience of being able to look back and connect the dots, so to speak. And when you're growing up, you don't realize that you're creating this future for yourself. But when I was younger, I always liked to draw. I drew all the time. I would get under the covers with a flashlight and get in trouble, but I drew all the time. And I also realized that whenever we played, and of course, I grew up before PlayStation, before tablets, before video games, all that stuff. You had to play outside. You had to go make your own fun. And whatever we were playing, whether it was sports with cowboys and Indians, or we were playing school, or we were playing house, whatever it was, I had to organize everybody's space. Whatever their space, whatever we were playing, I had to organize their space before we could play. And of course, it drove my brothers nuts. I also grew up with an uncle who was a general contractor. So there were plans around the house all the time. And me not understanding the process at the time, I started drawing on his plans. And he asked me, "What the world are you doing?" That's not what he said, but it was like, "What are you doing, girl? I'm trying to build this thing and you're messing up my plans." Well, I told him, "I'm fixing them for you because this doesn't work. This flow here works better." So I would draw on his plans. So we did that for several years. And then it dawned on me that there was something before it got to the contractor. And it was just a whole world that I had not been introduced to. And then discovering the beauty of the art, the creativity, and then the intensity of the science, the research, the calculations, and the hardline drawings that went into it. It was just the perfect unit. And it was like discovering yourself, looking in the mirror and realizing who you were. So I didn't go to college right out of high school. It was a few years later, and I had a 5-year-old daughter, and then decided what I wanted to be when I grew up. But I had learned that about myself, that I knew architecture was it. And so I set off on a path and decided I was going to go to school, and made all the arrangements and got the part-time job and enrolled, set off to get licensed and work.
That's a great story that I've heard a couple times before, but it's always fun to hear it. And I have to admire every time I hear you say that you have a 5-year-old child, because I was a full-time student and that's all I had time for. So my admirations to your effort and dedication. That is not easy to do on any level, whether it's just, to be a nurse, to whatever it is, to have to also address the having a child and being responsible for somebody else besides yourself. That's amazing. So congratulations on such a well job in all aspects. So now you were president of AIA Tallahassee in 2018, if my research is correct, and AIA Florida president in 2024. I had the pleasure of serving on the AIA Florida board with you when you joined, which you joined really quickly after your service at Tallahassee had completed. And I always admired how quickly you joined the conversation and leadership at the board. I served as Miami director since 2013 and was president in 2022. It took me almost 10 years to have the courage to run. You, however, quickly stepped up to the plate and produced results. So my question to you, as many of your guests, is a two-parter. Why do you think AIA membership is important? And why did you choose to take leadership roles at both Florida and Tallahassee?
So first of all, I think the reason I feel like AIA is so important is that, like we've discussed many times, is that AIA is the only organization that advocates and fights for the profession. And so that brings about this collective voice. We can be a part of that voice together. And together, I think we have a much clearer, stronger voice. And I've always believed that if we don't speak up for architects, we don't fight for the profession, that we by default let other industries or allies or legislators or building officials speak and make those decisions for us. And I don't know about you, I'd prefer to be a part of making decisions that affect how I work and practice every day. So I was surprised when I got involved with AIA that there was so much advocacy in the background that most people don't realize that is going on. And you realize it's like, if we're not a part of that, we're doing ourselves a disservice. But I believe it's our future too. I think we must mentor and guide and empower the emerging professionals and students coming out of school. They're just our future. It's a large group, but it does a very important service that I wish everyone knew and understood. I also have appreciated the friends and colleagues that I have gained along the way. It's amazing to be able to call Lourdes you. I know that if I have a question or if there's something in my business that I'm trying to hash around, I can call you and say, have you run into this? And that is priceless. The reason I got involved, I think that was the second part of the question, right?
Leadership roles. What prompted you? Because you're right, and most people don't know what we do. And then they do, but they still are just kind of just members. But you chose to be more than just a member.
So there was probably back 2014, around in that time, I think. I found myself with somewhat free time. I have 3 kids by then. They were in high school and college, and they were driving themselves and taking care of themselves. So I had some free time, so to speak, and got to thinking about what I wanted to do and thought, I wanted to give back to the profession that had given so much to me. So I thought it was time to get involved. And so I called AIA Tallahassee and told the president, I want to become a part of the group here in Tallahassee, and was ready to get involved. And he said, great, we need a secretary. And well, first it was treasurer, but then the treasurer decided to stay. So with what is typical of most small components, I started out as secretary, and then you do treasurer, and then it was advocacy, and then vice president and president. So I did the rounds. I was so focused on what we were doing in Tallahassee, I had not really looked at the state level. And then Vicki, who was the EVP at the time, mentioned the convention committee. And I think I did that before I joined the board. But then one evening, Nati called me and she said, I'm sorry to call you so late, but you've been nominated, which blew me out of the water. And she said, I need to know if you'd be interested for one of the vice president's positions. And what went through my head was, nobody knows me. I'm not known around the state. So it's kind of safe. You can do your speech. And if you win, you'll figure it out then. And if not, you've dodged a bullet. So I began to think about what would I do after my experience with Tallahassee? What would be my focus? I gave my speech online. If you recall, that was during the 2020. And it was really interesting because Steve Panzarino was president. We did it all online, and then we had to get off and come back on for them to announce the winners. And my internet went out. So I had to call Becky and say, all right, who won? Who won? And she said, you did. You and Josh did. So that was fun. But it was basically to give back, to serve the community and serve the other architects and the association.
I remember that year because that was the year I was running for president-elect. And you're right, we had to do all of our speeches,
Yeah, that's
the
right.
Zoom.
You did.
And I
Yeah.
remember sitting in this same conference room that I'm here. I came in on a Saturday because I think I don't know what day it was. And nobody was in the offices anyway. So, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I don't know if I could do this. But, obviously, you and I both succeeded. And so that's
Yes.
why I was, you were able to, you were one of the vice presidents that I had the fortune to work with. So I'm glad you took that time. And I find it funny that you say you had some time on your hand with teenagers. I don't know. I used to tell people that I made the mistake of participating when I had small children, that was even more complicated. But I don't know, teenagers is just as bad. When you want
They
something,
are.
you find the time to do something. I'm
Yeah.
a firm believer of that. So that's great
Yeah.
to hear that you had time on your hand and gave it to us. So speaking of time, this is your third season for as hosts for the podcast, and I enjoy listening to them as I build Legos during my holidays or I'm driving home. And you and your guests have a really smooth flow of conversation, which is genuine and enjoyable. Plus, I learn things along the way. Podcasts are not my usual thing, as opposed to other generations, but I think the Voice of Florida Architecture is really a fantastic series, and I have to congratulate you on your efforts. And I happened to look when I was listening to them. I tried to listen to almost all of them to prep, and it said 22 episodes in 2023 and 5 whatever last year, and I was like, oh my God, that's like a lot. So I'm going to break this into two questions, first we'll start with the idea. So this is an idea that AIA Florida has had since before you joined the board. I mean, I still remember the strategic meeting when that first came about. I think it might have been Monty Stark from AIA Tallahassee's original idea. And we all thought it was great, but that's as far as it got. So you took the idea and made it a real initiative. How did you do that? How did you force that next step that we had since before you joined the board?
So when I got involved with AIA and started going to the conventions and meeting people around the state, it was Joyce Owen's theme for her convention that year, communicating the value. And that just resonated with me because in my experience, people don't know what we do. There's so much more to what we do. It's the intangible, it's that research, and it's that thought, and that's that years of training that people don't realize. They just think it's pretty pictures. So that message resonated with me. And every time we had a meeting of any kind and we discuss, we really need to be educating the public. We need to get our message out and communicate our value. I found that we were good with sharing it with each other, but we were not as good at getting it out to the public, or not as effective. And so coming up into my presidency, how do we do that? How do we take that next step in getting the message out? And in Tallahassee, we had experimented with doing op-eds in the paper. It was hard and it wasn't successful. Our paper, and it's sad because we're the capital city, but we just really don't have much of a paper. People aren't reading the paper. And that was my first thought, that old school newspapers. But I realized, no, the people today, the generations today, people today are getting their message in podcast and online and in social media. And I thought that's what we need to do. We need to do the podcast. Funny enough, it was over Christmas break, and I called Monty. He was the communications director for me that year. And I said, I have an idea and I want to run it by you because I'm going to need your help in pulling this off. Not realizing that he had earlier conversations, had been a part of those conversations. So I thought he will either hang up on me or he'll be excited. So he took it and ran with ideas for us to do podcasts. So he immediately, we did this list of different ideas to do on the podcast. He was going to Nashville for Christmas, so he was packing and talking to me. We sort of got the framework in our head, and then we took it to Becky. Becky, I want to do a podcast. Of course, Becky being Becky, she's already, 4 or 5 steps ahead of us looking at how do we put this in there. So I wasn't sure she was ready for buy-in just yet, but we continued to work on it. It came into fruition the year that you won the gold medal. So we did a quick one, not a quick one, but the first one we did was about announcing about all the great things at the convention. I too got the deer in the headlight look when the cameras turned on. So it was videotaped. It wasn't just the audio. And so I thought I really got to work on this and get comfortable with this if we want this to be a success. And I wasn't sure how it was going to move forward. Would it be something out of the communications? Would the host change? And then during some of the conversations, it was, if you're willing, the voice needs to be the same. It needs to be consistent. Chrissy came on board as our communications director, and she's another phenomenal person that works on this. So she helped with our list. We decided like I said, we announced and talked about the convention. And then the very first thing we said, we have to do the gold medal winner, which just happened to be Lourdes. And if you recall, you didn't get questions ahead of time. I actually sat next to you in one of the sessions before we recorded and wrote out your questions, but I had heard enough of your story that we could get to the root of who you are and why you were so deserving of the gold medal. It's been an honor. And I think with each episode and with each guest, we're getting closer and closer to being what I have envisioned. And that is that we learn from each other. People want to come in here and see what's going on around Florida if they have a question about what's going on in Florida. We introduce the different components, and I think we still have a few to introduce. And it's just amazing to find all of the people that are so dedicated to serving the profession, and they have these incredible programs going on in their communities. This could be inspiring and help people learn.
So you've sort of answered my next question, which was the whole logistics and the impact. But I actually want to add, and I can see the impact for our members and for the community. But my question now is really, what is the impact to you as an individual? What does it mean to you? What motivates you to keep doing this, right? Because if we came up with 22, when I realized not all of the sessions are as long last season, because sometimes it's advocacy, 5 minutes, but it still takes time and commitment out of your schedule. You run your own business. You have family, you have all other activities. So what does it mean to you? And what do you think the impact to you personally? I understand the impact to the community, which I think is fantastic, but for you personally.
To me personally, I'm very proud of the efforts. I call Chrissy and Becky, our executive producers. Chrissy does our scheduling, and then Becky edits, and we sound professional. I am proud of what we've put together, and I have to say, this is our third year, like you mentioned. The legacy series that we do with Steve Panzarino, which was recently posted, was our 50th episode. Isn't that
Awesome.
great?
That is
Yes.
amazing.
So to be able, first of all, I'm very proud of what I do as an architect. I don't think there's no more nobler a profession because, like I said, with my theme, that we have impact on people's lives from start to finish. And I think that is just such an humbling responsibility. But to be able to share what people are doing and to share people's stories and the impact, that's why I like this legacy. We started with Mr. Saki, Angel's father. I had not heard of him, but when you look across his body of work, it's phenomenal. And then when we bestowed the Lifetime Achievement on Victor Lundy here a year or so ago, I think he was like 102. But then to look back on his body of work, but to be able to share people's stories. The other aspect is that we are reaching that generation that a podcast is their mode of communication and getting their stories, that they see and hear what AIA is doing for them and what is going on around the state and avenues for them to get involved. I hope that inspires them too. It's just an inspiration to me that I can serve and give back to the profession and to the association.
Think you have, and we again thank you, because I think what you're doing is very much what we're always striving to, let's be relevant, and you are the strategic council chair this year, and that is one of the things we're talking about, how do we stay relevant, and podcasts, as you say, is the next generation. People don't read the newspaper. They don't, they barely watch the news. They watch, the title of the event. So I think this is, I think you've done a great thing, and I'm glad you continued to be the host, because now it's be sort of, as you say, the legacy of that. I think it's important. And I think it ties a little bit back to my next question. You were in the inaugural class of the Jacob Leadership Institute, which I was reminded when I listened to Steve's podcast last week that he helped establish it in that first, and actually was listening to Nathan, which you did some months ago, about originally these were sessions that we would do at the convention. It was working, but it wasn't really as much as what we was intended. So you were in that inaugural class, and of course I was listening to Adam, who was with you. And of course, this is where the questions come from. How was your experience, and what is one takeaway of that time for you?
So first of all, it was an incredible experience. I got so much more out of it than I ever anticipated. But you have to keep in mind, I was not an emerging professional or a new graduate.
And I wasn't either. And the reason I did it in 2023 is because you did it and you said I could do it, even though I was not an emerging professional or a recent graduate or anything like that. I was like, Rhonda gave me permission, so I'm going to do it.
So, yeah, of course, I've been in business for 20 years by then, but I love to learn. And I felt like the least it could be is a refresher course. But during the promotion of the class, there was a quote from Brett Hood, who was the leader of the program, said that you will delve into your leadership style like you've never done before. And I thought that's the reason to go to it. You get into a routine and a ruts, and it's just easy and you do the same thing. So are there ways in this ever-changing workforce that I can be better at what I do? Holding to his promise of delving into that, my takeaway was I found that I may have been holding some prejudice toward a younger generation, because my generation grew up and you worked and you gave a full day's work. And a lot of times working is how you coped with your problems. You worked. So you were there early. You were the last to leave. You left it better than you found it. You just worked. And coming in, even with my experience at firms earlier, when you had interns, they would show up late. They would stay on their Blackberries, they would leave early. That just gave me a negative impression of younger generations and their work ethic. So in one of the sessions, Brett asked one of the Gen Zs, what is the worst thing about boomers? And then it came to the older group. What do you dislike about younger generations? I said, I don't appreciate, their work ethic. People don't want to work. One of the younger, actually, she was from Tallahassee. She said that they think they have all the answers and know everything and don't listen. What I learned from that is they do work. They do have a work ethic. They just learned it and do it differently. So the takeaway for me from that is understanding that by the different generations. I could come back to my firm, and in using that framework, looking at the two people that worked for me at the time, because they were the two younger ones, it made me see them different, understand them different. And not only that, it helps me set them up for success, understanding how they look at things in their worldview. I think it's helped me be a much more efficient and to run the office that much more efficiently. And then if you're interviewing someone, the conversation is a more important, more in-depth, real conversation. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I have to agree. I really enjoyed when I did the the Jacob Leadership Session. Like you start to think, the different generations and what motivates them. I see Brett Hood is really fantastic at making you think about how you are as a leader. And when I've ever since I went, I have been at least somebody, one or two people from MC Harry are participating, because I really do think we need to learn how we are as leaders. And unless somebody like him who really knows how to do it, you just you're not making it up, but you kind of are making it up as you go.
Yeah.
And it starts to make you think, and one of my best takeaways from that class is when somebody brings me something and they want me to look at it, I start with, I don't know if you did it in your class, is this the best product that you can give me, before I redline it? And the first time they'll be like, maybe not, and they take it, right? So, and it's rather than just making them feel like they don't know anything. I have learned to challenge them to challenge themselves to do better, to put more effort. Just because I've never done this before doesn't mean I shouldn't give it. So I think that's one of the most important lessons to learn in these kind of leadership programs, of which there are many, but they don't always necessarily pick the same things. And so
The great thing about Brett, how he leads the program, and I hope this inspires people to go that may not be considering it, is that he creates an environment where two generations can speak honestly and have a conversation and come away with that and have skills to put into practice.
Put yourself in other people's shoes, right? Which is something that I grew up being taught that, right? My grandmother used to say, your rights begin when the other person's rights end. And as a young person, I didn't understand it. As I got older, I got it, right? You have to think about what other people may need that might not be yours. So let's go back a little bit in time and talk about when you were president of AIA Tallahassee in 2018. Hurricane Michael struck the Panhandle, the strongest hurricane to hit the Panhandle in first Category 5 in the U.S. since Hurricane Andrew in 1992, for which I was here in Miami. So tell us how you and AIA Tallahassee and AIA Florida, but mostly AIA Tallahassee, responded. And I've heard you say architects are the second responders. So tell us a little bit more about that.
In regard to Hurricane Michael, Category 5, growing up was unheard of. And then when you went over and saw the devastation, it was like a war zone. I had never seen anything like that. And we got to thinking about, what can AIA Tallahassee do? So the first thing was that people need, the basics: water, food, diapers, just, batteries, flashlights. We started taking up donations to take things over. And it become really clear how dysfunctional the whole area. You don't really realize just how, communication is down. Some roadways are down. There's no school. Kids got behind in school. Gas stations didn't work. Employees or employers didn't have anything to do. So it just shuts the whole society down. So if you recall, I don't know if you remember Eve Williams, but she was president of AIA Tallahassee before me. So we started organizing, and she did some research, and we identified districts, and there was like a church, and they were mainly churches in different areas. And you have to keep in mind, AIA Tallahassee has 9 counties. And so some of the area we overlapped with AIA Northwest in the Pensacola office. And we found churches in different areas so that we could deliver to them, and they knew best of how to distribute the goods and services. Then when it come out just how bad it was, AIA Florida, Vicki Long and Becky reached out to us, and they offered the headquarters as a place for donations. And then I'm not certain how they got the word out, but then we started hearing from the other components around the state. So they started sending money and goods and services in as well. And so we just we organized people to take things over every week, and then organize things, getting donations and things organized and getting ready to go out. And the interesting thing to me is how the needs of the community or the areas changed from week to week. They would send us, this is what we need this time. We need cleaning supplies this week, or we need tarps and camp stoves this week. So it was amazing to watch the evolution of the needs of people that were living through this devastation. But we organized it and then just set up a system of people volunteering to take things over or going shopping when we got food to take canned goods over and things like that. What was the second part of the question? I've been talking so long,
That's okay. It was really about what that second responders, right? That's something you're talking about. And
Yes.
I think you've sort of answered it. What is our role as second responders? Because as I'm listening to you and you're talking about, how every week was a little bit different and you identified churches. And I remember when I was president, Ian came through, we had a couple of hurricanes, and the challenge that AIA Florida had and it's not necessarily the local FEMA people, but how to coordinate, right? They would call us on Sunday, we need 4 architects there on Monday. It's like, it doesn't work that way. And every time I listen to you or other people talk about helping out at hurricane or disaster areas, it tends to be from that grassroots level. And so how do we, that's the next step. How do we make sure that the state and local and federal government understand that the grassroots sometimes is a whole lot more effective than some established things. And I know we keep trying to get that organized so that as architects we can come in, as you say, second responders. And I love how you label it. And so that's kind of, tell me a little bit why you call it that, and what prompted you to call that, because I think it's very important.
That term actually came from the SAP training in AIA
Safety
Tallahassee.
assessment, right?
Yes, we conducted one in Tallahassee and had several architects from around the region come through and get SAP certified. It's part of their training because the first round of responders are those that it's rescue. It's people that may be stuck or hurt or unfortunately have passed. That's the first round. So they taught us that we're the next round, we're the second round in that where you go in and assess and do your assessments. And thinking about that when we started setting up the distributions for Hurricane Michael, I thought this is part of that second response. You're there to meet the needs after the fact. And so I've just kind of called us that ever since because it just fit in with the SAP training.
And I think that's very important. And I know we're trying to have you present at different conferences and things like that to talk about that, because I think all AIA chapters really should look at this. The natural disasters is not unique to Florida or California and their fires, but we have them all over. And
we'll continue to.
And we'll continue, and they will continue to grow. And I think Florida can really be a great source for all these components that maybe don't know how to do it. And it's that grassroots, right? In this case, you and Eve took the initiative to help and then I know how we found out at Florida, because the minute that the conversation came out, Becky and Vicky, as the leaders of AIA Florida, started to share it with all the components, and so sometimes the grassroots is much more effective. But if we can give skills to our co-leaders and other components when they have a problem, right? They don't have to solve it. To use Beverly's Frank's favorite phrase, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I think that's what you did, one bite at a time. So I think that's fantastic, and I hope you can continue to sell that, right? That there's many ways of being that second responder that has nothing to do with assessing whether the building is falling down or not.
Exactly.
But to provide what that community needs. And so I think that's really important. 2 more questions. And I know you're a proud FAMU alumni as well as an educator. And why do you think it's important that we teach the next generation? And I know you don't teach anymore, but I have one of your former students work in my office, and she's like, oh, I love Rhonda, so obviously you have a cheering crowd. Why do you think it's important, and will you go back to educating, again in the future when you have free time?
There you go. Actually, I am last semester and this semester have taught the professional practice class at USF. So that's been
Oh,
a
fun.
challenge. It's been fun, yes. And I think that it's important that practitioners are part of the education so that students get an idea of I'm very much hands-on. And in my teaching, it's hands-on. I just talked about specifications a week or so ago, and I give them a project, a set of drawings, and I have them do the outline of the specifications. And so then we talk about that so that they understand it. I want them through this professional practice class that they may not understand everything, but when they go into the office and someone talks about a billable hour, they understand what their contribution is to that. Or if someone talks about E&O insurance, they won't need to understand that or deal with that every day, but they understand what it is. Or construction documents. I asked this class last semester, what would you like to come out of the second semester, the final semester? And they all said, we want to be able to read construction documents. And so I've added a little thread of that to go along with it, and it's been fun, and they have lots of questions about it. It's important that we're involved with students, and if you in the last few conventions, we've been very successful at bringing the deans in on conversations and having students. And just this last legislative day, there were more students involved than we had architects, and we're working on making that more efficient. Leaders, they're the next leaders of the profession. They're the next leaders of the association, and they're going to be that group that is on the front edge of the AI and the technology. And if they understand where architecture has been and where the association is coming from and how to support it, I think that'll make them better leaders.
And I think it's great that you are spreading your wings as an educator outside of the Tallahassee area, because I think you're right. As professionals, we really need to help the next generation, because to use that word I used earlier about relevance, then they become relevant to the profession. So it's just not just us as a profession be relevant to the community, but the people joining the profession need to feel like they're relevant. They really become part. And if they know what all these terms mean, that they won't feel as lost per se. So I commend you for taking the time to do that, because you have so much free time that it really helps the whole process. And then my last question, and you've asked this of several people, so I'll ask it. Remember, we're turning the table. What is your most treasured contribution or event or success, whichever you want, as president of AIA Florida in 2024?
That's a hard question because the presidency has so many aspects to it. You get to come up with the theme, you get to generate that excitement, give your convention committee room to make this exciting convention with programming. But my year was an interesting year in regards to advocacy. Actually, it kind of started the year before, even when I was president-elect. We were looking at, the deregulation showed its head again, and then the CCNA with the universities came up. And so there was a lot of testimony at Senate committee hearings, just being there to make certain that our voice was heard and to be able to represent the association and the architects around the state. Actually, and it's around the country, because this is an issue that it affects all of us. The national scene at the time in my year was another tricky. It was trying to keep us focused on, this is what AIA Florida is about. This is what we do. This is how we've been successful, and we need to move forward and keep us focused. I enjoyed efforts in getting the architecture and education back moving, because coming off COVID, it hadn't picked back up yet. But I think that's another important issue that we do, that you expose younger children so that they can see what architecture is about, and let them have the choice. There is so much involved with that. There's so much that you get to do for the association and for people. So that's kind of hard to pick just one.
It is a hard question. And every time I hear you ask it of the person, I can hear them going, oh my God, don't know. Why did you do this to me? So that's why I asked it to you, so that you know what you're asking of
I
your guests.
know, it's
Yeah, I'm
hard.
sure you'll continue to ask it, but I think perhaps the best summary for me of your accomplishments is probably the theme of your convention, places we've
Live, work,
lived, work,
play.
and play.
Hmm.
And if I think of all of the prior presidents, their convention theme, the last 8, 10 years really reflects their personality, right? I was listening to Steve, craft, community,
Hmm.
communication. Mine was empower and elevate, which is a lot of what I do. Elizabeth's last year was a paradigm shift. So, so
Hmm.
it's like if you start to see what we pick as our convention themes, it is who we are as individuals, which I don't think is the intent when
When
Becky
you
goes,
pick it,
so
no,
what's your
no.
theme? And she'll ask you in, I don't know, November. You're like, no idea.
Well, and
So
to that kind of ties into being able to look back over the each president during the time that they became president. Their person, their personality, their theme was timely and it was meant to be during that time. It's like Ignacio's of transformation. If there
yes,
was ever a time that that was relevant, that was it. And yours, empower and elevate. And the first time I heard, I think it was just empower, and then during our strategic, we decided that it was more empower and elevate. And I wasn't certain how robust that might be. But as the year evolved, again, it was the perfect message, the perfect theme, the perfect convention, and the perfect person running presidents. It's just a phenomenal experience to be a part of it and be able to contribute.
it really
Yeah.
is. And I'm really glad you're doing this series because I think it's important for people to know who our past leaders were and what things applied to what was happening to them.
I want to reach out and get more names and ideas because I know that they're like Mr. Saki, and
Mhm.
I have Deborah Lupton's interview coming up soon. She was the very first,
The first woman, first
yes, yep,
woman president.
and she did the groundwork for the Department of Management Services fee curve. Can you imagine that legacy? How every
Yeah.
architect affects their day to day. I want to know other ideas so people can reach out and let us know. There's people in our communities that we need to tell their story and celebrate their contribution. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, Rhonda, for taking the time to share your journey, your story with us. Now we've put you on the spot, so now you can go back to being the host and putting your guests on the spot. Thank you to all of our listeners for listening to this episode of our AIA Florida Legacy Series. We hope today's conversation has offered insight, perspective, and inspiration drawn from a lifetime of leadership and service to the architectural profession. The experiences and reflections shared by our past presidents and leaders remind us that AIA Florida's strength is built on mentorship, commitment, and a shared responsibility to advance the profession. Their wisdom continues to inform the work we do today and the future we're shaping together. Join us for future episodes as we continue these conversations, preserving the stories, lessons, and legacy of the leaders who helped define AIA Florida. This is Lourdes Solera, FAIA, your temporary host. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Voice of Florida Architecture, a podcast of AIA Florida. Thank you.